The wind moved through the cemetery like it was carrying secrets no one wanted to remember, and as Eric stepped out of his car gripping a small bouquet of white lilies, his eyes immediately locked onto a figure that didn't belong, standing still by the polished gray headstone where his wife Claire had been buried 6 months ago, and for a moment he couldn't breathe because he knew that face, or at least he thought he did, until recognition hit him like a wave and his stomach turned. That woman standing at Claire's grave wasn't a friend or family member or neighbor. She was the homeless woman he'd given $300 to just yesterday, the same woman sitting outside the grocery store with a cardboard sign held between cracked fingers asking for help. Her hair tangled, her cheeks hollow, her eyes lost and desperate. Something about her had made him stop when he normally wouldn't, had made him reach into his wallet and press the cash into her hand without thinking twice. Maybe it was the way her hands trembled, or how she didn't ask for more. Maybe it was because she reminded him of something he couldn't name. But now seeing her here in the cemetery standing at Claire's grave whispering something he couldn't hear was like watching a dream slide into a nightmare. Eric's feet moved before he told them to, the gravel crunching beneath his boots as he walked toward her, unsure of what he was about to say, unsure of what this even was. And when he was a few steps away, she turned to him as if she had already known he was coming. Her eyes met his, and they weren't the same hollow, desperate eyes from yesterday. Now they were steady, calm, focused, and that scared him more than anything. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice low and shaking but firm enough to hide his confusion. And she didn't look away. She simply said, "I'm sorry, I needed to see her." And that made no sense at all. Eric blinked. "Do you know Claire?" he asked again, slower this time, and the woman hesitated before lowering her gaze to the headstone. "She saved my life once," she whispered, and Eric's heart pounded harder because Claire was a nurse, yes, and she'd saved people before, but this woman didn't look like someone Claire would have known personally. She didn't seem like someone who just walked into their lives and left a thank you card. This woman looked like someone carrying a history no one ever asked about, and now she was here saying Claire had saved her, but not just that, saying something else, something stranger. Something heavier. "Now it's my turn," she said, and Eric took a step back, unsure if he was hearing correctly. "Your turn to what?" he asked, not hiding the suspicion anymore because this felt wrong, all of it. The way she stood, the way she spoke, the way she stared at the grave with a kind of quiet intensity that didn't belong to a stranger. "Return the favor," she said slowly, and when Eric didn't respond she added softer, "She didn't just die." And suddenly the air around them seemed colder, like winter had crept in early and settled into his bones. Eric's jaw tightened. "She was in a car crash. She was driving home from the hospital. She lost control. That's what the police said. That's what happened." He said it like he was trying to convince himself of it, and the woman looked at him like she understood that need but didn't believe it either. "She was taken," she said again, her voice steady, and the words hit him like ice in his veins. "What do you mean taken?" he said, but she didn't answer right away. Instead she looked down at the lilies in his hand and then back at the grave like she was putting together pieces he couldn't see. "You need to hear the truth," she said finally, "but not here." And then she started to walk away like that was the end of the conversation, like she had just dropped a match on dry leaves and walked away from the fire. But Eric wasn't letting her go that easily. He followed her, catching up quickly. "Tell me now," he said, grabbing her arm, and she flinched but didn't pull away, just looked at him with something like pity. "You think you know what happened, but you don't," she said calmly, "and if you want to find out the rest, then you'll need to decide right now whether you want the truth or the comfort of believing she died by accident." And Eric stared at her, unable to speak, because part of him wanted to tell her she was crazy, that this was insane, that Claire had died 6 months ago and he had mourned her, he had buried her, he had sat in that hospital room staring at her lifeless body for hours, and yet here was this woman, someone he had never seen before yesterday, talking like she knew something he didn't, something dark and dangerous and buried under everything he thought he understood. And it wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it, the way her eyes didn't flinch, the way her voice didn't shake, like she had been holding this story for a long time and was finally choosing to let it out. "Why me?" he asked, barely more than a whisper, and the woman gave the faintest smile. "Because you're finally ready to ask." And then without another word she turned and walked out of the cemetery, disappearing down the road like she knew where she was going. And Eric stood there next to the grave holding the flowers, still unsure if he should chase after her or run in the opposite direction, unsure if he had just stepped into something real or something he would regret for the rest of his life. But something in him had already shifted, because now he was thinking about Claire's crash. Differently now, he was wondering about things he had never questioned, like how the police couldn't find her phone, or why her brakes had failed in a car that had passed inspection days earlier, or why the last thing she had said to him before leaving for work that night was, "If something happens, promise me you won't believe it was an accident," and how he had laughed it off like she was just being dramatic. But now those words hit him like thunder, because now he wasn't sure what to believe in. The only person who seemed to have any answers was the homeless woman. He gave $300 to someone who apparently knew more about Claire than he ever could have imagined, and so without really thinking he turned and started walking the same way she had gone, clutching the flowers tighter and telling himself he wasn't losing his mind, he was just chasing the truth, whatever it turned out to be. Eric kept walking the same path the woman had taken, unsure if he was following a lead or a ghost. The gravel from the cemetery faded into cracked sidewalk and then into dirt as he moved past the iron gates and down a street he hadn't walked in years. The sun was starting to sink behind the trees, casting long shadows, and for a second he wondered if he had already lost her, but just as he was about to stop he saw her ahead near the corner, sitting on a broken bench beneath a flickering street lamp. Like she had known he would come, like she had planned this from the beginning. She didn't look at him when he approached, she just said quietly, "Sit down," and he did, without speaking, without questioning, just sat beside her, both of them silent for a moment. As a car passed slowly in the distance she finally spoke, "You loved her, didn't you?" And Eric turned to her, stunned by how gently she said it, like she already knew the answer and wasn't asking for confirmation but for something else, maybe permission. Maybe truth. He nodded slowly. "Of course I did, I still do," and she smiled, just barely a flicker across her face. "Then you deserve to know what really happened," she said. "I'll tell you everything, but when I do you have to understand something. It's going to hurt and it's going to change everything, and once you hear it there's no going back." Eric swallowed hard, his throat dry, his pulse still hammering. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he also knew he couldn't walk away, not now, not when the woman sitting next to him might be the only person who knew what really happened to Claire. So he nodded again, and she began. "6 years ago," she said, "Claire and I met by accident. I was working as a cleaner in a hospital, night shifts, quiet hours, mostly keeping to myself. I didn't talk to patients, I didn't talk to doctors, I was invisible until one night I found Claire in the stairwell crying. I didn't know who she was, just that something in her had broken, and she couldn't hold it in anymore, and I sat beside her. Without saying a word, just sat there, and after a while she looked at me and said, 'It's not right what they're doing,' and I asked her what she meant, and she said the hospital had been hiding things they shouldn't be hiding, deaths that weren't recorded, treatments that weren't approved but given anyway, and patients disappearing with no explanation. She tried to blow the whistle once, but they buried it fast, and after that they started watching her, not directly, not in the open, but in small ways. Her shifts changed without warning. Her car was broken into, her supervisor started giving her warnings for things she never did, and it got worse every month. She told me she couldn't leave, not yet, not until she got proof, and she did. She gathered names, dates, documents, even videos, but she didn't trust anyone, not even the police. So she told me if anything ever happened to her I was to find you and give you this." The woman reached into her coat and pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside was a flash drive, old, scratched, a little dirty, but clearly important. Eric stared at it, then at her, unable to speak, and she went on. A week before she died she called me, said she had enough to go public, said she was ready to meet a reporter, someone outside the state, someone clean. She was scared, but she sounded hopeful, and then she was gone. The crash wasn't random, she said flatly. Someone tampered with her car, and if you look hard enough the mechanic who signed off on her inspection disappeared 2 days after she died. I tried to follow up, but I don't have the resources. I'm not connected like you might be. I've been running ever since. I don't know who they are, but they're powerful enough to make people vanish, powerful enough to silence her for good." Eric felt dizzy. The bench beneath him seemed too small, the air too thin. He thought back to all the nights he had spent staring at Claire's picture, wondering if there was something more to the way she died, and now here it was laid bare by a woman he had met by chance, or maybe not by chance at all. He took the flash drive from her hands carefully, like it might break, and looked at her. "Who are you really?" he asked, and for the first time her eyes wavered a little. "I was just someone who cleaned up floors and emptied trash cans, but Claire saw me. She treated me like a person, not a shadow, when no one else did, and when she asked me to help I said yes, because I owed her more than anyone ever knew." Eric stared at the flash drive again, heart thudding louder and louder. "What's on this?" he asked. "I haven't watched it," she said. "It's encrypted. I don't have the password, but Claire said you would know. It's something only the two of you shared." Eric's hands tightened around the drive. Something they shared. He thought for a moment, then it came to him, the phrase Claire always whispered when she was afraid, the same one she had written once inside a book she gave him before their wedding. "Faith in the fire." He looked back at the woman and said it aloud, and she nodded. "That sounds right, try it when you open it." Eric tucked the drive safely into his jacket, pocket, his mind racing already. Thinking of how to decrypt it, how to check its contents without being traced, and then he looked at her again. "What's your name?" he asked, and she hesitated before saying, "Lena, it's Lena, and thank you for not walking away when you saw me at the grave. Most people would." If she stood slowly brushing off her coat. "You should be careful now," she added. "If they realize someone else is looking, they'll come after you too. I know how to disappear. You probably don't." She started to walk away again, but Eric called after her, "Wait, how do I find you again if I need you?" She paused, then turned slowly. "I'll find you if I need to." And just like that she melted into the dark streets again, leaving Eric alone with a secret that was already starting to burn through his soul. The walk back to his house felt twice as long, and by the time he stepped through the door and locked it behind him, he was already pulling out his laptop. He plugged in the flash drive, heart pounding, and a password screen appeared immediately. He typed it in slowly, hands shaking, faith in the fire, and the screen blinked once, then again, and then it opened. Folders, rows of files, some video, some documents, all dated, all marked with codes, and inside one folder a name he recognized from the news, a patient who had supposedly died during a routine procedure but whose autopsy had never been released. Eric opened the first video. It was grainy, filmed on what looked like a hidden camera, and Claire's voice filled the speakers, soft, serious, scared. "They're testing drugs that haven't been approved," she said. "They're doing it without consent. They're covering up the deaths. They falsify records and delete anything that doesn't fit. I tried to report it to the hospital board, but they threatened me. They said if I loved my family I'd keep quiet, and now I'm scared. I don't know who to trust. If you're seeing this, then I'm probably already gone, but don't let it die with me. Not again." Eric paused the video, unable to breathe, eyes burning, throat tight. She had known it was coming, and still she fought. Still she tried to speak out. He leaned back in his chair, hands gripping the sides, head spinning with everything that had just been handed to him. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Whatever Claire had found was big enough to get her killed, and now it was in his hands. The only question left was what he was going to do with it, and whether he had the courage to finish what she started. Eric barely slept that night. He sat in the dark living room, the glow from his laptop casting shadows on the walls as he clicked through every file in the flash drive, each one revealing another layer of the twisted reality Claire had tried to expose. There were voice recordings, email, surveillance clips showing doctors in hushed arguments over altered reports and test results. It wasn't just one rogue operator, it was systemic and terrifying. He could hear Claire's voice in one of the files, trembling but determined, saying, "If you're listening to this, it means I failed to stop them, but maybe you still can." And that one sentence ignited something in him, a fire that had gone cold since the day he buried her. He opened the document folder next, scrolling past medical records, falsified release forms, and emails from Claire to an anonymous address labeled only as M. She had been reaching out, trying to connect with someone outside, someone who had promised her protection in exchange for evidence, but there were no replies, only her messages growing more frantic until they suddenly stopped. Dated the night before her crash. Eric leaned back, trying to make sense of it all, wondering who M was, and if that person had betrayed her or simply vanished in fear, just like Lena had warned might happen to him. A sharp knock at the door startled him out of his thoughts. He wasn't expecting anyone, and when he checked the clock it was just after 3 a.m. Heart racing, he walked quietly to the front window, peeking through the blinds, and saw a black sedan idling near the curb. No lights on, no movement. A chill crawled up his spine. He didn't recognize the car, and something about it felt wrong. Too clean, too quiet, too intentional. He stepped back slowly, grabbed the flash drive from his laptop and stuffed it in the lining of his old coat, then reached for the phone, but there was no signal, not even Wi-Fi. Like something had scrambled the connection. Panic began to rise in his chest as another knock echoed through the house, louder this time, more urgent. Eric didn't answer. He crept toward the back door, slipping out into the cold night, his breath forming clouds in front of him. He cut through his neighbor's yard and down the alley behind his block, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. He didn't stop until he was nearly a mile away, hiding behind an abandoned gas station, chest heaving, ears straining for the sound of anyone following him. When he was sure he wasn't being chased, he took out his phone again, and this time the signal returned. He quickly sent a message to a name he hadn't contacted in years. Marcus, a former military friend turned cybersecurity expert with a reputation for cracking any code. "I need help," he typed. "It's urgent, life or death." He waited only seconds before Marcus replied, "Address," and no questions. Eric sent his location, and within 15 minutes Marcus's truck pulled up, headlights off and door swinging open. Before it even came to a full stop, Eric climbed in, shaking and silent, and Marcus didn't say a word until they were on The highway headed out of town. Then he glanced at him and said, "So who's trying to kill you and why?" Eric handed him the flash drive and began explaining everything from the moment he gave the money to Lena to finding her at Claire's grave to discovering the files and strange car outside his home. Marcus listened carefully, his eyes narrowing but his hands steady as they drove. "Claire was digging into medical corruption," Eric said. "Someone powerful covered it up and now they know I have what she found." Marcus nodded slowly, then asked, "Where did she get this footage? How was she not caught?" Eric looked out the window, then back at him. "I don't know, but I think someone on the inside was helping her. Someone called M, and if we can find out who that is, maybe we can figure out who's still covering it up." They drove for hours until they reached Marcus's safe house, a remote cabin buried deep in the woods surrounded by tall pine trees and nothing else. Marcus had built it for emergencies, and Eric had never expected to actually need it. Inside it was stocked with gear, weapons, old computers, and more importantly an encrypted server. Marcus quickly plugged the flash drive into one of his machines and began the process of tracing the metadata back to its origins. Eric paced the room while he worked, trying to calm the swirl of questions in his head, wondering if Lena was safe, if she was even real or just part of something bigger. And then something clicked. In his memory, a name buried in one of the emails from Claire. A Dr. Howard Denner, a research director Claire had mentioned once over dinner. Someone, she said, gave her a strange look when she questioned a treatment trial. Eric pulled out his phone and searched for Denner's name and found that he had quietly retired 2 weeks after Claire's death. No announcement, no tribute, just vanished from the public eye. He showed Marcus the article and Marcus whistled low. "Guy ghosts right after the whistleblower dies. That's not coincidence. Let me dig." Marcus typed for a few minutes, then frowned. "This guy's finances are clean, too clean. No paper trail since last year, no new address, no tax filings." And then he paused, staring at the screen, except one transaction wired from a clinic in Mexico under a different name but same ID code. "That's our guy." Eric leaned over his shoulder. "What kind of clinic?" Marcus zoomed in and found a name: Project Aegis, a private facility with no public contact information, no website, just a P.O. box and a satellite map image that showed a walled compound in the middle of the desert. Marcus looked up. "You really think Claire found out about this?" Eric nodded, his jaw tight. "I think she was going to expose it and they shut her down." Marcus sat back, tapping a pen against the table. "If we go after this, we do it right. We don't just drop a video online and hope for justice. We need to find them. We need to get inside that facility and see what they're hiding." Eric agreed, but he felt the weight of what they were planning, like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing once you jump there's no going back. And suddenly his phone vibrated. It was a blocked number and a single text appeared: "Stop digging or you're next." Eric stared at the message as his blood ran cold. "They know," he whispered. Marcus glanced at the phone, his face hardening. "Then let them come. We're not backing down." He started pulling supplies, loading a bag with cameras, burner phones and weapons, then handed Eric a small encrypted radio. "Stay close, no calls, no texts from here on out, only this, and if I say run, you run." They moved quickly, packed everything they needed, and before the sun had fully risen they were already back on the road, headed south toward the clinic, toward the truth, and possibly toward their deaths. Eric didn't know what they would find or if they'd even make it inside, but one thing was clear now: whatever Claire had uncovered, whatever she had died trying to reveal, was still out there, buried under lies and threats and secrets, but not for long, not if he had anything to say about it. The drive through the desert felt like a journey into another world, dust swirling around the tires, the sky burning orange and gold as the sun dipped lower on the horizon. Eric sat in silence in the passenger seat, his fingers tightening around the edge of his jacket, the flash drive now hidden in the lining of Marcus's reinforced bag. Marcus had barely spoken since they crossed the state line, his focus entirely on the GPS coordinates pulled from the wire transfer that led to the off-grid clinic called Project Aegis. Neither of them knew what to expect, but both were prepared for the worst. They drove for another hour past abandoned gas stations, rusted-out trailers, and roads that looked like they hadn't seen another car in weeks, until finally they came to a stop near a long dirt path blocked off by a steel gate with no signs, no markings, no guards that they could see. Eric and Marcus left the vehicle half a mile out and continued on foot, the dry air thick with silence and tension. After 10 minutes of hiking they reached the outer edge of the compound, hidden by tall brush and shadows from the cliffs above. Marcus raised his binoculars, scanning the area, cameras on the northeast wall, motion sensors lining the perimeter, and 2 guards pacing near the only visible entrance. It wasn't just a clinic, it was a fortress, and Marcus whispered, "This place is not supposed to exist." Eric stared at the tall fences, the strange quietness that clung to the compound, and thought of Claire, thought of her Final words and the fear in her voice. If you're watching this, I'm probably already gone. Marcus pointed to a low dip in the wall, a section where the rocks formed a natural blind spot, and said that's our way in. They waited until the guards were out of sight, then moved quickly through the gap, crouching low and staying silent until they were pressed up against the back wall of the building. From there Marcus used a small device to scan for network signals and found one isolated encrypted feed buried under layers of firewalls. He looked at Eric. If we can get into the server room, I can plug in and copy everything they've got. Eric nodded, his heart pounding with every step as they crept through the side door Marcus had picked open. Inside the building was sterile white walls, low fluorescent lights, and a heavy silence that made every footstep echo like thunder. They passed through corridors that smelled like chemicals and cold metal until they found a stairwell leading down into the sublevel at the bottom. The hallway opened up to a room full of locked cabinets, buzzing servers, and screens showing live medical data. Marcus moved fast, sliding a drive into one of the server ports and typing furiously while Eric kept watch. Suddenly a voice crackled behind them. What the hell are you doing here? Eric spun around to see a woman standing at the doorway dressed in a lab coat, her ID badge flipped backward, her face frozen with shock and confusion. Before Eric could say a word, she held up her hands and said, "Wait, are you Claire's husband?" Eric's breath caught in his throat. "How do you know Claire?" The woman closed the door behind her, quickly locking it, then whispered, "I'm Claire and I were in contact. She sent me everything before she died. I've been hiding inside this place ever since, trying to keep her files from being destroyed. I never thought anyone would come looking." Eric stared at her, barely able to process what he was hearing. Marcus turned and said, "If that's true, then help us get this data out of here." Nodded quickly and pulled a security key from her pocket, inserting it into the main console. The screens flashed and more files began to open. Documents labeled "Unauthorized Trials, Patient 47, Synthetic Trial B, Subject Termination Records." Claire had been right. Everything she claimed was here. Spoke rapidly. Their goal was gene therapy, but without consent. They used homeless patients, addicts, undocumented immigrants, people they thought wouldn't be missed. They erased records, faked deaths, even transferred patients across borders to continue testing. One woman survived and escaped, and that's when they started killing anyone who knew too much, including Claire. Marcus copied everything, then turned to and said, "How do we get out?" She replied, "There's a laundry chute down the hall. It leads outside the fence. If we go now, we can be gone before shift change." But just as she said it, the door behind them exploded inward. Guards with rifles pouring in. Marcus shoved the drive into Eric's hand and shouted, "Run!" Eric grabbed and sprinted out the side door while Marcus stayed behind to cover them. They could hear gunfire behind them, shouts, chaos echoing through the corridors, but they didn't look back. Eric and reached the chute and dove inside, sliding through darkness until they landed hard on the outside edge of the compound. They ran through the desert, ducking behind rocks until the gunfire faded behind them. Eric's lungs burned, his legs felt like they would collapse, but he kept moving, clutching the drive like it was life itself. Eventually they reached a service road where a truck was waiting. Had called in a favor from an old contact, and they climbed in just as headlights appeared on the road behind them. The truck peeled out, disappearing into the dust as bullets struck the ground where they had just been. Eric didn't speak for miles. He sat in the truck, silent, stunned, listening to as she explained everything. Claire had almost succeeded, but someone on the inside betrayed her. They found out about the meeting with the journalist and crashed her car to make it look like an accident. Had planned to disappear too, but when she saw Eric at the cemetery on surveillance footage, she decided to wait, hoping he would come for answers. And now they had everything they needed. The only question was what to do with it: expose them and risk being hunted for the rest of their lives, or hide again and live with the truth. Eric stared out the window, thinking of Claire, of the flash drive burning in his hand, of Marcus who might not have made it out, and then he said, "No more hiding, we finish what she started." Nodded slowly, her face pale but determined. "Then let's make them pay for everything." They didn't stop driving until the desert gave way to city lights, the truck humming low as it weaved through the edge of Las Vegas, neon signs flickering outside, while Eric clutched the flash drive tighter than ever, his mind racing through everything they had witnessed and lost, including Marcus, whose fate was still unknown. Sat beside him, eyes fixed on the road, but her mind clearly deep in some calculation. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper, "We can't go to the police. They'll either hand us over or silence us too. We need to go above them, leak it to the world with proof that's undeniable, not just data but testimony, stories, faces they tried to erase." Eric nodded slowly but said, "We don't have time. They're already hunting us. They'll erase this faster than we can blink." Turned and looked at him, then said, "There's one person who might help, someone Claire trusted before things got bad, a man named Adrian Wolf, an independent journalist who used to work with high-profile whistleblowers until he went off-grid after an exposé nearly got his family killed. She tried to contact him before she died, but I don't think he ever responded. Eric's heart jumped at the mention of Claire trying to reach someone else, someone she believed in. Then what are we waiting for? M gave directions to a remote town in Utah where Wolf was last seen living under an alias. It took them 10 hours to get there, swapping vehicles twice and keeping off main highways. They arrived at a small town tucked into a valley where cabins were scattered among tall trees and snow still clung to the mountain shadows. They found Wolf in a rundown general store wearing a thick beard and a heavy coat, and at first he denied who he was, but when Eric mentioned Claire's name something shifted in his eyes and he said, "Follow me." Without another word Wolf brought them to his cabin deep in the woods. No cameras, no internet, no signals, just a fireplace and old radios. Eric laid everything out: the flash drive, the story, the betrayal, and M added the details. Claire had uncovered the names, the records, the human trials. Wolf listened in silence, not interrupting once, then stood up, walked to a closet and pulled out a case filled with outdated but untraceable tech and said, "If we do this, we do it fast and loud. We don't hand it off to a news agency. We flood every network, every dark web forum, every mirror site at once, because once it's out they can't bury it anymore, and once it's public they can't just kill you without the world asking why." They spent 2 days in the cabin preparing. Wolf set up redundant upload paths, converted the files to multiple formats, recorded Eric and M's testimonies, and stitched it all together with evidence from the flash drive. On the third morning, just before sunrise, they went live, sending the story out to every corner of the internet. Within hours it had spread across independent news networks, conspiracy blogs, and even leaked into mainstream headlines, with anonymous sources exposing Project Aegis, whistleblower files, and stolen medical documents. Eric watched it unfold from the cabin, holding his breath as the world reacted, and the name Claire Grayson finally lit up search engines across the globe. But then came the storm. Black SUVs spotted in the town, strange men asking about outsiders, drones hovering near the tree line. Wolf looked at Eric and said, "We've got one shot to stay ahead. I'll lead them off. You two get to the airstrip north of here. There's a pilot who owes me a favor. He'll take you to Canada." Eric didn't want to leave another ally behind, but Wolf insisted. He had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. If they were caught, he could delay them long enough to keep the story alive. Eric and M ran again, moving through the forest just as gunfire cracked through the trees behind them, Wolf's cabin exploding in a burst of light and smoke. Eric didn't look back this time. He focused only on moving forward, snow crunching under his boots and cold air slicing through his lungs. They reached the airstrip at dawn, and a small plane was waiting, the pilot waving them in without asking questions. They boarded and within minutes were airborne, leaving behind the wreckage of what used to be safety. Eric stared out the window as the earth fell away, his thoughts consumed by Claire, by Marcus, by Wolf, and everyone else who had paid the price for the truth. The pilot handed him a sat phone mid-flight and said, "This came through for you." It was a message forwarded from one of Wolf's contacts, a single sentence: "Marcus made it out, he's safe." Eric closed his eyes. For the first time in days he felt something like hope. When they landed in Canada, they were met by a lawyer from an international human rights group, one of many organizations that had seen the leaks and reached out offering protection. Eric and M went into hiding under new identities, but the fire had already spread. Investigations were launched, high-level officials forced to resign, bodies were exhumed and records uncovered. Claire's name was cleared and her work recognized as the catalyst for exposing one of the most horrific medical conspiracies of the decade. Months passed and Eric kept a low profile, but one morning while walking through a quiet part of town he saw a mural painted on a wall. It was Claire's face surrounded by flowers and words that read, "She gave them a voice," and he stood there for a long time, breathing slowly, feeling the wind and hearing her laughter in the back of his mind. And eventually started working with advocacy groups, helping others like Claire had once tried to do. And Eric wrote everything down, all of it, the truth, the pain, the rage, and in doing so found some small piece of peace. He knew he'd never forget what they lost or what it cost them, but he also knew that silence would never protect the innocent, and in the end it was truth that had set them free. The seasons changed and Eric found himself waking up each day not in fear but in reflection, hidden beneath a new name in a quiet coastal village far from where the story had begun. He still carried the weight of it in his chest, the faces, the voices, the sacrifice. Claire's memory haunted him in the gentlest way, always just behind the silence, always in the wind that brushed through the pine trees near his window. There were moments when he thought about the people they couldn't save, the victims whose names were never spoken aloud, but there were also letters, now handwritten notes, emails that reached him through encrypted channels from families thanking him for revealing what happened to their missing loved ones, from former patients who recognized the clinic and finally understood what had been done to them, and from journalists who called the Project Aegis leak the beginning of something irreversible, a crack in the wall that would never close. Again, Em had taken on a new role, more public than Eric, her face now part of a movement demanding ethical reform in experimental medicine. She spoke at events, gave interviews, shared parts of the story while keeping other details hidden to protect those still at risk. She had changed in ways that only someone who'd walked through fire could. Her strength no longer sharp and defensive, but quiet-rooted, purposeful. Eric watched from a distance, proud of her, proud of Claire, who had chosen courage over comfort, truth over silence, and even in death changed the world. One morning Eric received a package wrapped in brown paper with no return address. Inside was an old leather journal, Claire's handwriting filling every page, and a voice recording from Marcus, who now lived under another name in a remote corner of Europe. Marcus said, "I found this in Claire's old apartment. I think she meant for you to have it." And when Eric opened the journal, it was like hearing her speak again, reading her hopes, her fears, her suspicions, and the moment she realized someone from inside Project Aegis had turned against her. But what struck him most was the final entry, written days before her death. In it she said, "If you're reading this, it means you chose truth over fear, and I'm proud of you. Remember, justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just choosing not to stay silent, choosing to live in a way that honors what was lost." And that's when Eric knew what he had to do. He took everything he had, every document, every recording, every thought, and turned it into a book, not for profit, not for fame, but for legacy. A story that didn't hide behind numbers and facts, but showed the human cost, the grief, the betrayal, the courage it took to face giants and refuse to bow. He published it under the title Claire's Echo, and within weeks it spread faster than anything he expected. Translated into dozens of languages, taught in ethics classes, quoted by advocates, it became a symbol not of tragedy but of transformation. And in the final chapter he wrote, "The truth doesn't always save you. Sometimes it destroys what you were. But in its aftermath something else grows, something honest, something whole." Eric never remarried, but he didn't live alone either. The people he met, the lives he touched, the quiet community that formed around him slowly filled the empty spaces, not as replacements but as reminders that life moves forward even when it's been broken. And then one summer morning, standing by the sea watching the tide roll in, Eric felt her hand in his, not physically, not with fingers and skin, but in memory and love, in the invisible thread that binds those who never truly leave. And in that moment he whispered, "Thank you, not for dying for the truth but for living for it, and for giving me the courage to do the same." And as the sun rose higher, spilling light across the water, Eric knew the war was not over, but this chapter was. And in the ashes of everything lost, something unbreakable had taken root, a truth that could not be buried again.